This is an ABC News special report. Attack on the Capitol 1 year later. Now reporting, David Muir.
Hello, everyone, and we're coming back on the air at this hour. It is noon here in the East on this January 6th, 1 year since the attack on the Capitol. We are expecting very shortly here House Speaker Nancy Pelosi will lead the House in a moment of silence as the nation remembers the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Just a short time ago, we heard from President Biden and Vice President Harris, the president directly blaming former President Trump for the insurrection, saying amid the horror that the country and the world witnessed, what we did not see, he said, the president off of the Oval Office in a room watching the events as they unfolded. Just off the Oval Office doing nothing, watching with lives at risk, with the Capitol under attack. President Biden says Trump's bruised ego mattered more to him than our democracy and Constitution. Speaker Pelosi calling this January 6th a period of remembrance, of reconciliation. But of course, in a sign of the true challenge that remains ahead, most Republicans are staying away from today's events, many downplaying the significance of this day. We see the speaker entering, wearing masks, of course, a reminder of the time that we're in, just one of the many challenges the country continues to face. Let's listen to Speaker Pelosi.
The House will be in order. The prayer will be offered by our chaplain, Chaplain Kibben.
Would you pray with me? Sovereign God, these times are in your hands. Incline your ear to us and hear our prayers for our Congress, for our nation, for its people. As compatriots, we are too often separated by politics and perspectives, individual certainties and intractable opinions. On this anniversary of national discord and despair, send your healing spirit among us and tend to the dispiritedness and disagreement here within and around the people's house. This day, into your hands we commend our spirits of fear, anger, and uncertainty, and ask that you would revive in us our shared commitment to this country's highest ideals, its strength in its diversity, its power in its defense of the common good. On these virtues was our country founded, and for them countless heroes have sacrificed. Remind us, inspire us, the aggrieved, the skeptical, the disenfranchised, all of us, to hold true and remain worthy of this noble heritage. We offer the words of Abraham Lincoln, that once again we would emerge from our national turmoil with malice toward none and charity for all, with firmness in the right as you give us to see the right, to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves. Merciful God, restore to us this sacred obligation of unity and moral purpose. Inspire us to live lives which serve as a witness to your restoration and reconciliation. We pray your peace over your people. In your sovereign name we pray. Amen.
The chaplain, Rear Admiral Margaret Kibben.
Pursuant to Section 11A of Resolution 188, the Journal of the Last Day's Proceedings is approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Pursuant to Section 4A of House Resolution 829, no organization or legislative business will be conducted on this day. The chair will address the chamber. Today, 1 year ago, the Capitol and those who work within it were targeted in a violent insurrection that sought to undermine democracy. As we acknowledge the horror of that day, we honor the heroism of so many, particularly U.S. Capitol Police, institutional staff, floor leadership, committee, and member staff. We had a session this morning where we could say thank you to many of them. Unfortunately, COVID did not enable us to have the full House. We will have another time when the attending physician allows. But as we acknowledge the horror of that day, in the face of extreme danger, they all risked their safety for our democracy by protecting the Capitol complex, members, staff, press, etc., press within, safeguarding the ballots in those mahogany boxes to validate the election, and ensuring that Congress could accomplish our purpose and honor our duty to the Constitution and to our country. That day and in the days after, they were the defenders of our democracy, and their courage and patriotism remain an inspiration. Because of them, Congress was able to defeat the insurrection, to return to the Capitol that same night to ensure that the peaceful transfer of power took place. Because of them and our members, the insurrection failed. 1 year later, this sacred space where members legislate, children learn, visitors are welcomed, was defiled and damaged. We know that. As we reflect on that darkest day, we remember that the insurrection sought not only to attack the building, but to undermine democracy itself. When the violent assault was made on the Capitol, its purpose was to thwart Congress's constitutional duty to validate the electoral count and to ensure the peaceful transfer of power. But the assault did not deter us from our duty, I say again. In this Capitol, a symbol of democracy to the world, that evening, the Congress, because of the courage of all of you, rose to honor our oath and protect our democracy. We did so honoring the words of President Lincoln during the Civil War. "Fellow citizens," he said, "we cannot escape history. We will be remembered in spite of ourselves. No personal significance or insignificance can spare us one or another. We hold the power, therefore we bear the responsibility," Lincoln said. Today, we accept responsibility as daunting and demanding as any that previous generations of leadership have faced. Since the January 6th insurrection, there have been continued assaults on our democracy, undermining the sanctity of the vote and the integrity of our elections, which are the basis of our democracy. Let us be true to the vision of our founders, who brilliantly established our democracy and made it a model for the world. Let us honor the sacrifice of our men and women in uniform who protect that freedom with their lives. And let us remember the words of another president, our patriarch, President George Washington. When he delivered the Constitution to the Congress, he said this. He said, "This Constitution represents the creation of a government which would allow for the continuation of rigorous debate, but relies upon the common sense and good faith of the American people to find the better angels of our nature." As we proceed, let us find our common ground, reach our nation's heights with liberty and justice for all, remembering the words of our great patriarch, and in the spirit that our chaplain referenced of President Lincoln, with malice toward none, with charity toward all. Let us acknowledge today, as I conclude, I want to acknowledge our fallen heroes of that day. U.S. Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, U.S. Capitol Police Officer Howard Livingood, Metropolitan Officer Jeffrey Smith, U.S. Capitol Police Officer Billy Evans of a later assault. Now I ask all members to rise for a moment of silence in their memory. Thank you. Pursuant to Section 11B of House Resolution 188, the House stands adjourned until 6:30 p.m. on Monday, January 10th, 2022.
So there you hear it. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi with her words honoring the bravery of that day, saying they hope to do this again when the House chamber is fuller. Obviously, the pandemic prevents many from being in that room or certainly being close to one another. Of course, the politics at this time is another factor in the reason we see primarily Democrats in that room. I want to bring in our chief Washington correspondent, Jonathan Karl. John, you witnessed that moment of silence, obviously extremely powerful, particularly in light of hearing from those officers again last night who defended the Capitol. They said there are many whose names are not known to this day who saved one another from that assault, and of course those who lost their lives and took their own lives in the weeks and months that followed because of what they have been dealing with ever since, the private suffering. I want to ask you, though, about the partisan display, even on a day like today with this moment of silence. The vast majority, if not all of the people on that House floor serving the country right now were Democrats. You've talked with one key Republican, though, who thought it was important to come.
David, it is striking that, for the most part, Republicans are absent from this commemoration. Republican leaders in the House and the Senate are not in Capitol Hill. They are not in Washington. They are not taking part in these commemorations at all. There is one very notable exception, and I just spoke to him minutes before he walked onto the House chamber to be there for that moment of silence, and that is the former Vice President, Dick Cheney. One of the most prominent Republican elder statesmen alive in America today. He decided to be here today. He came with his daughter, Liz, who is another one of the very few Republicans taking part of this, obviously a central figure in the January 6th committee investigating what happened 1 year ago today. And Dick Cheney was there. I spoke to him briefly before he walked into the House chamber, and he told me, I said, why are you here? Why did you feel it was important to be here? And he told me it is an important historical event. You can't overestimate how important it is, referring to this anniversary of January 6th. And then he told me something that I think will make a lot of waves today, David. He told me that he is deeply disappointed in the Republican leadership. Those are his exact words. He said, I am deeply disappointed in the Republican leadership. And he was specifically talking about how they have handled the events of January 6th and the aftermath, and what he described as a failure to defend the Constitution. Strong words from somebody who was not only the former Vice President of the United States, a former Chief of Staff to a Republican president, but also somebody who served here in the House as a member of the Republican leadership, and somebody looked up to many of the people currently in Republican leadership as a mentor, as somebody who they admire. And he is telling them today that he is disappointed in how they have handled January 6th and the aftermath.
John Karl reporting here. Very strong words from a former Vice President, Dick Cheney, today, who decided to come to the Capitol on this day, certainly not only to support democracy, but his daughter, one of the lone Republicans on that committee investigating January 6th. Of course, just a few Republicans in that room. I want to bring in our senior White House correspondent, Mary Bruce. She's live at the White House. And Mary, there's already reaction to President Biden, what he said earlier today. And you've been covering this president for his first year in office. He tried to stay away from the former president as much as he could, but today he did not hold back.
He certainly did not hold back, David, and we are already seeing some Republicans coming out and accusing the president of trying to politicize this moment. But I do think it's striking to note that the president not only issued a very stern, harsh rebuke of former President Trump, but he also called out Republicans who he says fear the wrath of the former president, those Republican lawmakers who continue to perpetuate the big lie about this election. The president sending a clear message to those 147 Republicans who still, even after the insurrection, after the violence last year, went into the chamber and continued to vote to overturn the will of the people. President Biden is really casting this moment, not saying that January 6th, that the insurrection was somehow a culmination of President Trump's presidency, but really just a dangerous chapter in this ongoing campaign against our democracy. The president vowing to fight this, saying he will allow no one to place a dagger at the throat of democracy, David.
Saying it's an inflection point not only in this country, but around the world for democracy. Mary Bruce, our thanks thanks to you. I want to bring in our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas. Pierre, you and I watched together last night as that interview played with 3 of the officers who defended the Capitol. You heard that one word come up repeatedly in the interview: accountability. When I pressed them on what that meant, whether that meant the former president, they said absolutely, it does not matter who they find accountable. They must find all, though, accountable. Those who participated, who showed up, but those who planned and encouraged this as well. And you have reporting here on the Attorney General, who, of course, was very careful with his words in the last 24 hours.
Indeed he was, David, but he wanted to make clear that this investigation is far from over and they will follow the facts wherever they lead. He's making the point that they will hold people accountable, not just who breached the Capitol, not just the people who committed acts of violence, but anyone who was involved in the planning of that violence. So that could include people who were communicating with some of the people there. That could go as far up to President Trump. We don't know. The investigation will look at that very closely. That's a high bar to meet. But one of the things that struck me, David, very quickly here is the law enforcement officers that you spoke to are scarred still to this day. They're still healing, dealing with what they dealt with, the racism, the fighting, one describing it as a medieval fight. You spoke with them. It was a privilege to talk to these officers, and we can see even today that they're still living with this every day. I spoke to Harry Dunn last night. He told me that this is not an anniversary for him, that he lives this pain every single day.
And you point out the suffering, and they say in many cases private suffering. They've chosen to come forward. They respect those who have not, and they encourage those who are still suffering from PTSD to get help. And if it means reaching out to those 3 officers, they are willing to take that call, saying there is a lot of pain 1 year later. I want to bring in Terry Moran, because one of the things the president clearly tried to do today, Terry, was methodically go down the facts, saying that many Republican supporters of the former president have called into question the results of the presidential election, but then everywhere else on the ballot beneath the president, Republicans had a very strong election day a year ago. There's no questioning of that. He pointed out the governors in the battleground states, the former AG, the former president's own AG, saying there's no widespread fraud, no evidence of that. Tried to lay out the facts, but moving forward here, that's not going to erase the very real reality here that many people have their own set of facts, their own truth.
That is so true, David, and it's an existential threat to Joe Biden's presidency, and he believes to the democracy. Remember, he came into this race for president in 2020 saying it was a battle for the soul of America, and he said those words again today. And January 6th shows how daunting that is. This week, I spoke with a Capitol Police Lieutenant, Ted Hopkins, and just like the officers you and Pierre spoke with, he too was on the front lines. He told me he felt like he was fighting a cult. His word. Cult. Said he couldn't believe it was real. And in fact, many of the attackers that day had been lost in an alternative reality. They were living in a different world. And millions more Americans who weren't here, reject violence, have nevertheless fully embraced a provably false version of the 2020 election. They've done their own research on Facebook. They've gotten swept up in conspiracy theories on the right-wing media. And no court, no journalist, no committee of Congress, no president will convince them otherwise. And that's Joe Biden's challenge. No previous president has ever had to face anything like this. If we don't share the same reality, how can we share a common land, a soul?
Important question. President Biden saying he did not choose this challenge, but that he will not shy away from it. Our thanks to Terry Moran as well. Our coverage will continue on ABC News Live, abcnews.com as well. And of course, I'll be back with the entire team for World News Tonight. For many of you, it's back to your local news. I'm David Muir in New York. We'll see you later. Good day.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.